In the last video, we uncovered one of the most disturbing laws in the Old Testament, a law that allowed a rebellious son to be dragged before the elders and executed by stoning. For many people today, that law feels shocking, uncomfortable, even horrifying, but that law was not the darkest moment in Israel's story, because there is another command in the Bible. One that raises an even more terrifying question, a command that forces us to ask something many people are afraid to say out loud. Why would God command the death of innocent children? Tonight we step into one of the most controversial chapters in the entire Bible, a chapter that has disturbed believers, confused historians, and fueled debates for centuries. 1 Samuel, chapter 15. A story of war, a story of judgment, and a story that forces us to confront the terrifying seriousness of divine justice. But before we go deeper into this mystery, take a moment to subscribe to the channel Biblical Mysteries and Stories, because here, we explore the darkest, the strangest, and the most mysterious passages in the Bible. The stories many people avoid, stories that raise difficult questions, and stories that force us to wrestle with the deeper meaning of Scripture. Now, let's step into the shadows of ancient Israel. The story begins with a king. His name was Saul, the first king of Israel, chosen by God, anointed by the prophet Samuel, and placed on the throne to lead God's people. But Saul was not a perfect king. Far from it. He struggled with fear, with pride, and with the constant pressure of ruling a fragile nation surrounded by enemies. One day, the prophet Samuel came to Saul with a message. Not advice, not a suggestion, a command, a direct command from God. And the command was terrifying. Samuel said, "This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they ambushed them on the way out of Egypt." This moment refers to something that happened centuries earlier, when the Israelites had just escaped slavery in Egypt. They were exhausted, weak, vulnerable in the desert, and the Amalekites attacked them. But they did not attack the strong warriors at the front. They attacked from behind, targeting the weakest, the elderly, the sick, the stragglers who could barely walk. It was an act of ruthless cruelty, and according to the biblical narrative, God had not forgotten. Generations passed, kings rose and fell, entire civilizations changed. But the memory of that violence remained, and now, the time for judgment had come. Samuel continued delivering God's command. Now go, attack Amalek, and completely destroy everything that belongs to them. Then came the words that disturb so many readers today. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. For modern readers, these words feel almost unbearable. Why children? Why infants? Why total destruction? To many people today it sounds less like justice, and more like annihilation. But to understand the weight of this moment, we must understand the world of the ancient Near East. This was a brutal era, a time when nations survived through conquest, where defeated enemies were enslaved, tortured, or completely erased. War was not fought with rules. There were no international laws, no peace treaties protecting civilians. War was raw, violent, total. Yet even with that context, the command in 1 Samuel 15 still unsettles the soul. Saul obeyed, at least. At first, he gathered an army, 200,000 soldiers. They marched into Amalekite territory. The battle was devastating. Cities burned, armies collapsed. The Amalekites were crushed. But then, something strange happened. Saul hesitated. Instead of destroying everything, he spared the Amalekite king, a man named Agag, and Saul's soldiers kept the best animals, the finest sheep, the strongest cattle. They convinced themselves it was reasonable. After all, those animals could be sacrificed to God. At least that's what they said. But something deeper was happening. Saul was rewriting God's command, softening it, adjusting it to his own judgment. And that decision would change everything, because the story now shifts. The prophet Samuel receives a message from God, and the message is filled with sorrow. God says something shocking. "I regret that I have made Saul king." Imagine hearing those words, the creator of the universe, expressing regret, not because God made a mistake, but because Saul had turned away from obedience. Samuel was devastated. He cried out to God all night. The next morning he went to confront the king. When Samuel arrived, Saul greeted him confidently, almost proudly. "I have carried out the Lord's instructions," Saul said. But Samuel heard something in the distance, a sound that exposed the truth. Bleating sheep, lowing cattle, the animals that were supposed to be destroyed. Samuel asked a question that echoes through history. "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears?" Saul immediately began explaining. The soldiers kept them, but they were going to sacrifice them to God. In other words, disobedience disguised as devotion. Samuel's response was sharp. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Then he spoke one of the most haunting lines in the Bible: to obey is better than sacrifice. With those words, Saul's fate was sealed. The kingdom would be taken from him. His dynasty would not last. Another king would rise in his place, a shepherd boy named David. But the darkest moment of the story had not yet come. Samuel asked Saul to bring the captured king Agag. Agag approached Samuel confidently. Perhaps he believed the worst was over. Perhaps he thought mercy had arrived. But Samuel spoke cold words. As your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. Then Samuel executed the Amalekite king, ending the story with blood, judgment, and silence. For many people today, this chapter raises disturbing questions. How could a God of love command such destruction? How do we reconcile mercy with total war? But maybe the deeper question is not about the past. Maybe the deeper question is about us, because the story of Saul reveals something about human nature that has never changed. Saul did not openly rebel against God. He simply adjusted the command, modified it, made it more comfortable, and people still do the same thing today. We reshape truth to fit our preferences. We soften commands that challenge us. We convince ourselves that partial obedience is good enough. In Saul's mind, sparing the animals probably seemed reasonable, maybe even spiritual. But in reality, it was disobedience wearing religious clothing. And that pattern still exists today. People claim devotion while ignoring difficult truths. They follow the parts of faith that inspire them, and quietly avoid the parts that demand sacrifice. The ancient battlefield may be gone, but the struggle inside the human heart is exactly the same. Even today, nations still destroy each other, leaders still compromise truth for power, and humanity continues repeating the same cycle of violence, pride, and moral confusion. The battlefield of Amalek may be lost in history, but the moral conflict revealed in that story is still unfolding today. Inside governments, inside communities, inside every human heart. And maybe that is why stories like this still disturb us, because when we look into the past, we sometimes see ourselves staring back. If you find these deep biblical mysteries fascinating, subscribe to the channel Biblical Mysteries and Stories, because here we explored the most unsettling, mysterious, and thought-provoking passages in Scripture. Stories many people skip, questions many are afraid to ask, and ancient events that still echo into our modern world. And if this story disturbed you, the next one may be even darker, because later in Israel's history, during a brutal siege, the Bible records something almost unimaginable, a moment when hunger became so extreme that mothers made a horrifying decision, a decision so disturbing it has haunted readers for centuries. In the next video, we will explore the chapter that describes cannibalism in the Bible, a chilling story found in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 28 into 9. A story of starvation, desperation, and the terrifying consequences of war. The prophets would later describe even darker imagery, so don't stop here. Continue this journey with us, click on the next video, and keep marathoning the darkest mysteries of the Bible here on Biblical Mysteries and Stories.